Welcome to the Academic Woman Amplified podcast. I'm your host, Kathy Mazak, tenured full professor, mom of three, and firm believer that the culture of academia needs to change radically. Women are revolutionizing academia within institutions that were not built for us. If you're ready to reject the culture of overwork, kick guilt and overwhelm to the curb, and amplify your voice to make a real impact on your field without breaking down or burning out, you're in the right place. And it all starts with writing. Let's go. Today, we're talking about 5 steps to sustaining your writing through crisis. Now, I'm recording this podcast on March 22nd, 2020, and if you're listening to it live, it's about a week or so later. We've just lived through a kind of unprecedented week here on planet Earth where many of us are now under lockdown and are working from home. And so many of our universities have also suddenly moved to online teaching, and so have our kids' schools. So in the spirit of social distancing, I am creeping into your earbuds today to talk to you about how to keep your writing going in the midst of all of this. Now, I'm going to start out by talking a little bit about writing in times of crisis, and then I'll get to those 5 steps. If you've been listening to my podcast, you know that in Puerto Rico, we have experienced our fair share of crisis in the past few years. And I want to talk to you a little bit about that and how it informs these 5 steps that I've come up with. So, in terms of crisis, definitely the worst for our family was the September 2017 Hurricane Maria. During that time, we also were stuck in our home, our family particularly, even though we were so much better off than our neighbors because we had solar panels already in place and rainwater collection water system. And many of the people in our town didn't have power or water for weeks or months. We were stuck in our homes with no communication with the outside world. And so that was true for about a week that we had to remove debris in order to get to the road and be able to leave our home. And then also several weeks after that, we were all, as a nation, kind of paralyzed by everyday life, like by the fact that we needed to source food. For many people, they needed to source clean water. And that meant that our university was closed for about 4 weeks. Schools were closed for a little less than that, but we were home every day with no internet for several weeks. So I wanted to just tell you that in my experience, and this is not the only, I'll tell you about a few more critical experiences we've had here in Puerto Rico in the past few years. But during that one, definitely the first week was really difficult. And then we started to get into a rhythm. And I'm hoping that by the time you're listening to this podcast, you have found some kind of rhythm for your work at home and stay at home life, whether you have kids or are caring for parents or have whatever other set of beings might be living in your home. Let me just say that the first week is so hard and disorienting for everyone, but things do get gradually better as you figure out what to do. And I'm hoping that at the moment that you're listening to this podcast, you are ready to return to thinking about your writing again. So I just want to also mention some other moments where we've had to work through crisis. One of them was a student strike, several student strikes actually, but the most recent one, which was months and months long, where we kept our research projects going, though we weren't giving classes because giving classes online actually would have been strike breaking. And that happened kind of in the middle/end of a spring semester. And we had to pick up that tail end of the semester after the strike was over. And by that time, we had our kids at home because it was summer break for the university. So we have experience, like we being professors in Puerto Rico do have some experience with dealing with the crisis that now people globally are dealing with, which is how do we give classes and have our kids home and actually live in really uncertain times. The most recent has been the earthquakes that happened starting a little earlier, but the big one was on January 7th of 2020. And we had several aftershocks, and that meant that school didn't start on time. And it was just this really big time of uncertainty in Puerto Rico. We didn't know when the kids would go back. We didn't know when we would go back. And so I would just say that all of these moments of uncertainty, and many of them which were really, really critical, and I would say in the terms of the hurricane, definitely traumatic, and in terms of the earthquakes, also traumatic especially for people who live near the epicenter. I would just say that we're prepared for this as much as you could be prepared for a global pandemic, right? We're prepared. And so I want you to know that these steps that I'm creating come from a place of drawing on that preparedness. Like maybe you are in a place that's never seen the semester disrupted for anything except maybe a snow day. Here in Puerto Rico, we are used to these kinds of disruptions. It doesn't mean they are not painful. It doesn't mean they're not scary, but we definitely have lived through disruption. And so that informs the 5 steps that I'm going to be talking you through today. All right, let's get started. So, step number 1 is get back to Tiger Time basics. Now, if you don't know what Tiger Time is, the best way to describe it is those hours of the day where you feel like, rawr, you could take over the world. And those times of day where you have energy and drive and focus are the times that you should be using for your writing. So I encourage you to hear more about Tiger Time by going back to episode 2. But basically, what you want to do is identify between 1 and 3 hours in the day, no more than that you would consider to be your best hours. These are the hours that you're just naturally going to get more done because you are less distracted. You feel like you can stay on task. You don't have that feeling of like that itchy feeling like you need to click over to social media or just check email for a second, but you can really focus. I want you to think about when those hours of the day are. They might be early in the morning. They might be after lunch. They might be late at night. It doesn't matter. There's no judgment. The important thing is to figure out what your Tiger Time is. And in episode 2, I give you a method for doing that. So check that out. Once you've figured out what your Tiger Time is, I want you to start from scratch. Go back to Tiger Time basics. And Tiger Time basics means that you're looking to schedule 1 to 2 hours once or twice a week of writing during your Tiger Time. So this is super, super important. You are not looking to start an everyday writing practice right now. If you have been feeling like it seems like most professors on the internet have been feeling, these last 2 weeks have been hard for you. You've done a lot of extra service work caring for students and also putting your courses online. And you've also gone through a big adjustment in your personal life that now you perhaps have to work from your home. And there's all kinds of other people around you that aren't normally there. So you cannot expect yourself to use the same techniques for getting your writing done now that you did before your work situation has changed because of the global pandemic. Okay, you cannot expect that of yourself. What we want to do is almost like a reset on your writing practice. Reset your expectations. 1 hour a week of writing during your writing time is going to get you way farther on any writing projects than forcing yourself to write when you're exhausted and can't seem to string a sentence together, or feeling guilty so you don't even get to your writing because you're just feeling guilty. A key thing about Tiger Time is you know when to write, which is during your Tiger Time, and when not to write, which is all the other times. And the idea is that you are going to be way more productive in less time if you write during your Tiger Time and deliberately don't try to write at other times, okay? So reset your writing practice by writing 1 to 2 hours once or twice a week. So that means somewhere between 1 hour and tippy top 4 hours of writing during the week. That's all you need if you're doing it during your Tiger Time. And I definitely encourage you to do it just 1 or 2 hours a week to get started, and then slowly add to that. All right. Step number 2 to sustaining your writing during this crisis is to shift your mindset. And I alluded to that in step number 1. You cannot expect yourself to do the same things that were working for you before everybody got sent home and were told to put their classes online. You cannot expect your semester to be the same. Your material circumstances have changed drastically, along with everyone else's. And so there is no way that you can expect yourself to maintain the same level of quote unquote productivity, although I hate the word productivity because it sounds like robots in a factory, but you can't expect yourself to maintain the same amount of productivity now that you thought you were going to do when you were first planning out your semester. So you have to shift your mindset. This is not business as usual. You need to adjust your goals and expectations. You need to take the bar way down. And that's with your writing as well as with all your other projects. So in terms of teaching and service work and writing, we are really going to be in survival mode for the next probably few months. And that's because we have these additional responsibilities of other humans in our home around us while we're trying to get work done, or you have the additional responsibility of making sure you have supplies, that you're social distancing, and just carrying the weight, which so many of us are doing, of anxiety about humanity right now, right? So with all of that kind of underlying your day, you cannot expect to be doing the same amount of things and in the same way as you were doing them before. So step number 2 is shift your mindset. This isn't business as usual. It will be again someday, but it won't be for the next few months. You need to adjust your goals and expectations. Step number 3, and I hope this is going to be really helpful for you, is to work 4 hours a day. So let me talk to you about this 4 power hours method that I've come up with as I think the best way to describe the difference between working from home and going to campus. When you go to campus and work for 8 hours a day, right? Like many of us are on campus for 8-ish hours a day. When you go and you're on campus for 8 hours a day, you think, I'm working for 8 hours a day. But you're actually not producing for 8 hours a day. You're not. You're walking between buildings. You're getting coffee. You're eating lunch. You're shuffling papers around your desk. Whatever. You're checking social media. Those aren't 8 solid hours of work. This year, starting our semester ended in May 2019. So since then, I have been 100% working from home. I'm on a leave of absence from my university to work in my academic writing coaching business. That's why I can create this podcast, because I have time to do that, because that's what I'm focusing on for this academic year. And what I've learned about working from home is that it's just not the same as working in person in an office. So I can get done in about 4 hours what I would get done in 8 hours on campus. And that's because I can really structure my time exactly the way that makes the most sense for me. So I can use my tiger time to its greatest advantage because I don't have to be on campus from, let's say, 8 to 4 or 8 to 5. I can choose the hours of the day that I work. And so I can make sure they're my best hours. So for me, what I try to do is work from like 8 to 12. Now, with the kids home, this is more difficult, 100%. So I will talk about that in a second. But basically, the point that I want to drive home is that you shouldn't be trying to schedule 8 hours. It's the same, if you have kids, it's the same difference between going to school and schooling from home. When you go to school, when my kids go to school, they're there for 8 hours, but they're doing all kinds of stuff. They're switching tasks. They're listening to other kids get feedback. They're going to the bathroom, they're eating, they're going to recess. So it's not 8 hours of your butt in the chair working on something. It's really not. So when their teacher sends something home, and this was a conversation I was having with my 13-year-old when she first started to get assignments from her school teachers to do at home, she was like, there's so much work. And I'm like, whoa, just do the work for today. They're giving you lots of work. It's for the whole next week. So you have to kind of break it up. And she realized that in 2 hours or so, she could finish everything that the 7th grade teachers were sending to her. And that's the principle that I'm trying to impart on you here. You don't need to work for 8 hours a day. You don't need to schedule yourself for 8 hours a day. And in fact, I think it's very reasonable to start out with a goal of working 4 hours a day. And then if you wanted to increase working hours during a day, you could go up to 6, but I would not try to go beyond that, because to even think, like, there's no way that on campus you're working for 6 hours. There's just like maybe you're working 6 hours, but not more than that. So try to work 4 hours a day. So here's my advice on how to do it. So these are power hours. And what that means is, because of the situation that we're in, and I'll speak specifically to having kids at home, because that's my situation right now, you're not going to be able to have 4 uninterrupted hours unless you have another adult at home and you switch off. So that could be like if your partner is also working from home and he or she has the ability to take the kids for 4 hours and then you give him or her however many hours they need, that's great. You could try that. But I think that what I mean by working 4 hours a day is that in the course of the whole day, from when you wake up to when you go to bed, you are looking to find 4 hours to get work done. That's 2 rounds of Frozen 2. For those of you who are keeping track, it's like 2 rounds of Frozen 2 and a couple of Frozen shorts. So think about how you might schedule the kids so that you could get those 4 hours. And, it can be plop them in front of the TV for a movie, twice a day. Seriously. And so the idea, though, here is that you work for 4 hours a day, and they're power hours, right? They're like you sit down and you really concentrate for an hour, and at the end of the hour, you stand up and do something else. And so when you're thinking about scheduling your time, one thing that you can do is to think of your time in terms of these blocks, like hour-long blocks. Make a list for yourself of what are the tasks, like the main areas of your work that you need to get done. So we usually think about teaching, research, and service, but I think we should be a little bit more personalized than that and a little more fine-grained. So I think you could think of one block as writing or research and writing, another block as teaching, prep, and grading. And maybe included in that is supporting students, or maybe you just want to call it supporting students. Meetings, perhaps you do have synchronous meetings for committees and things like that. Maybe those things are still going on, although I hope they're not for your sake, and also because most of those could be emails. And actually, that's speaking of email, that email is probably a block of time that you'll need to account for. And so when you're thinking about your 4 hours, can you on one day spend 1 hour writing, 2 hours on student work, and 1 hour on email? And maybe that could be Monday. And then that kind of ratio of hours on these different types of things can change as the week goes on. So for example, if you are teaching online and you are doing it mostly asynchronously, so a model that a lot of people have been using is asynchronous content with synchronous office hours. So it's like a flipped classroom. So the office hour time is synchronous, so they can ask questions and maybe have discussions, but the content is delivered through recordings. You could potentially use 2 or 3 hours on Monday for getting all of that stuff recorded and ready. And then you don't have to spend 3 hours for the rest of the days a week because you've already done the bulk of the work on Monday. Imagine a way to do asynchronous teaching is to give them some materials and assignments on Monday, and then they're due on Thursday at 1 or whatever, or they're due the next Sunday night, or however you want to schedule it. But what it could mean is you kind of stack a lot of your class prep and student support early in the week. And then as the week goes by, that they're working on watching the videos and doing the assignments, you're spending more time on writing or researching or reading as the week goes on. And you continue to kind of flip the week like that, so that at the beginning of the week, maybe you're doing 1 hour of writing, and then by Friday, maybe you could incorporate more hours of writing. And again, I am not advocating for writing every day. In fact, when I'm saying writing, I really mean writing and all the activities that lead up to writing, like outlining and researching and reading. So this could be a way to organize your time if you think of your time in power hours. And let me just mention in email, I think that about email, this is a great moment for you to put up boundaries around pretty much everything. So one thing that you could do, and that's actually step 4. So let's move right on into step 4, which is corral your online activities. All right. So you want to put boundaries around things like email and any synchronous meetings that you might be having as part of the service duties that you have. And what I mean by putting boundaries around it is if your university or the people that you work with have come to expect you to reply to emails within an hour, and that is really actually, I think, not a very good expectation to have, and you shouldn't be trying to meet that. Really, I feel like the reply time for emails could be 12 to 24 hours or more, depending, now maybe since we're teaching online, maybe 24 hours, not more, but you can reset those limits and those boundaries and teach people what to expect from you. The same goes for making meeting times. Let's imagine that you are basically running all your classes asynchronously with synchronous office hours a couple of times a week. And if everybody is doing that and they think, that means you're available for meetings or whatever, available for meetings all these other hours in the week, but of course you're home with possibly your children, you are not available 24/7. You are not. And so it could be, and I encourage you to think of ways that it could be easier for you right now to set up boundaries around time and corral certain activities like meetings onto certain days of the week so that they don't interrupt your time and that you have time to write. I encourage you to think of ways that you could say, like when people write to you and say, when can we meet? You send them a Calendly link. Calendly is a free calendar software tool that lets people use a link to schedule themselves onto your calendar. and you have very limited time set up and that you decide what they are. So you're drawing boundaries around everything. If you're going to get through a time of crisis, you must have boundaries around what you're doing. The same with email. Like, you shouldn't be answering email all day. You should choose an hour and always answer email at that time. Corral it into that hour. If it doesn't fit, you can start to rethink the way you do email so that you can reduce the number of emails, or you could make it fit into the hour. But you need to start putting limits on things and boundaries around things. This could be a fabulous time to redraw boundaries, because all of a sudden we are faced with, humanity's weaknesses, which I think puts everybody into a little bit of perspective, right? You're also, if you have kids at home, or if you have elderly parents at home with you, or even, your spouse or whatever, your loved ones are closer than ever, which I think also kind of changes, like physically closer than ever. And I think that kind of changes our perspective on things, or I think that it's fair that it should. And so as you're developing your 4 hours a day plan, you really want to be thinking about drawing hard lines around activities that maybe when you were showing up on campus would spill out of their containers. Okay, step number 5. Step number 5 is to ramp up your self-care. If living through Maria, living through hurricanes, living through strikes has taught me anything, it has taught me the importance of rest. And this rest that I'm talking about is rest that's going to prevent you from having a major breakdown. So I just want you to know that if you don't take time to rest, if you don't take care of your health, you will be headed towards a breakdown that may put you in the hospital. And hospital is not where you want to go right now. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the restore, create cycle. Now, a lot of people want to create more. And by create, I mean write more, design more classes, produce more things, read more things, like any kind of creation activity. Create something in the world. A lot of people want more of that. So they ask themselves, well, how can I create more? How can I ramp up my capacity for creation? And many people think, well, the way I'm going to do that is by working for more hours, because more hours means more capacity to create. And that is 100% wrong. If you work more, you actually create less because you are exhausted. And that energy that you worked so hard to identify, those energetic times, right, related to your tiger time in step 1, if you really learn how to wield that tiger time, you can get so much more done in such a smaller amount of time. So in order to increase your capacity to create, what you actually have to do is increase your capacity to restore yourself through self-care. And I'll give you a list of ways you could be restoring during this crisis, okay? So definitely your physical health and exercise is really important. There's tons of online videos and workouts and things that you could do to get your body moving. One thing that I'm doing is in Puerto Rico, and it's Puerto Rico in March. It's so lovely at about 5:30 at night. The wind kind of picks up. The sun is setting. It's really, really lovely. So that's our time that we go out into the yard. And we are very fortunate to live on a farm. So we have a pretty big front yard. And I just walk. I actually walk back and forth while my 4-year-old plays in the dirt. And that has been super restorative for me. I feel the wind. I watch the sunset. We see the first stars come out. My daughter yesterday what she did was create a rock museum with different kinds of rocks. We have a gravel driveway. So she's finding different types of rocks and setting them up as a museum. And every time I walk past her, she gives me a high five. And I walk about 1.5 miles just going back and forth in our driveway. And that has been super restorative for me. So find what the restorative physical thing you could be doing is for you and do that. In addition, other ways that I'm trying to do restorative activities, I'm really trying, although it's hard for me because I have such a wonderful Facebook group that I should be writing. Facebook group is so wonderful and I like to be in there, but I'm really trying to limit my social media time and not stare at screens all the time. Especially if you're going to be working online, you need to be really, really thoughtful about how you can kind of get away from the screen on purpose to restore your energy. So, of course, one way is to read books on paper. So, I am very fortunate to have ordered a new book series that came right before everybody started to self-quarantine. And I've been enjoying that. And that's something that I remember really fondly actually from Hurricane Maria was also that, especially since we didn't have social media because we didn't have internet or phone connection, we couldn't call anybody, we couldn't, get on the internet at all. I went back to my bookshelf and found a series that I had started and never finished. And I went back to that and read them. And I will always remember reading those in the afternoons during the hurricane isolation time. In addition, I listen to podcasts. I listen to books on tape as well. I mean, books on tape sounds so old-fashioned. I listen to Audible books or voice-recorded books, whatever you call them. And I do that sometimes while I'm, cleaning up the kitchen or whatever. I'm listening to something. So I'm not looking at it on a screen, which I think is really, really important. Other ways that you can restore yourself is to make sure that you take time to, I know this is strange to say, or maybe it's not. Shower, get dressed. I saw a meme that's like, okay, it's time to take off your nighttime pajamas and put on your daytime pajamas. And I know that that is probably where most people were last week or the week before, but it's time now to find a little self-care routine where you wash your face and get dressed and take care of your physical self. The reason for this, besides that it's good for your one and only body, is also because it's really good for your brain. The more you can incorporate restorative activities, the more you're going to be able to really take advantage of that 4 power hour model that I'm suggesting. So if you want to increase your capacity to use those 4 hours a day to their absolute utmost, then what you need to do is increase the amount of restorative time you're giving yourself. So if you don't have an hour a day scheduled either in the evenings, I'm doing that half hour. It's a half hour, 40-minute walk. And then whatever other time you want to take for whatever kind of restorative activity you want, reading or watching Netflix series or whatever, at least an hour a day needs to be about restorative time. So think about what is most restorative to you and do it every day, because that is going to increase your capacity to create. All right, so let's review those 5 steps to sustaining writing through the crisis. Step number 1 is to go back to basics with your Tiger Time. And if you're not sure about Tiger Time, I encourage you to listen to podcast episode 2, where I explain it all. And remember, going back to basics means starting slow, maybe 1 hour a week, 2 hours a week, and you can ramp up later. This is not the time to be enforcing some kind of rigorous writing process on yourself, okay? And that leads us to step 2, which is to shift your mindset. And the big idea here is this is not business as usual. You need to adjust your goals and expectations, be gentle on yourself, and realistic about what you can do in this crisis. Step number 3 is to adopt the goal of working 4 hours per day. And I gave you some tools to try to do that. I would encourage you that the biggest obstacle for you to working 4 power hours a day is your belief that you can do it, that it will be enough. We are so conditioned in academia to believe that overwork is the norm. And it is the norm, but it's not normal and it's not helpful and you don't have to overwork. I think that if you're working from home, starting with 4 hours per day, and truthfully, if you have kids and you are basically homeschooling those kids at the same time you're supposed to be working, I'm hoping by now you've gotten into some kind of rhythm, but if you haven't, start with 2 hours a day this week and work up to 3 hours next week and then 4. And the top number of hours you should be trying to work from home is 6. You just really don't need to work 8 hours from home. And you can use what you feel like is quote unquote extra time to restore yourself and do restorative work so that you can relax and really use those 4 to 6 hours a day to their utmost. Step 4 is corral your online activities. Plan simple, empathetic online courses, asynchronous if possible. Batch that so that you get most of that content created early in the week. Stack your meeting times so that you only are available for meetings on certain days of the week at certain times. Put limits on your email time. Now is the time to redraw and reinforce the boundaries around your time. And finally, step 5 is to ramp up self-care. And the underlying principle here is that our capacity to create writing, to create courses, to create lectures, our capacity to create is linked with our capacity to restore. And so if we want to increase our creative capacity, if we want to increase our creation in the world, we need to increase our restoration of ourselves. I hope that you've enjoyed this special episode about sustaining writing through the crisis. And I certainly hope that there isn't some other crisis around the corner. But even if you personally are experiencing a crisis, a health crisis, a loss in your family, anything that you feel like could be considered a crisis, I think these 5 steps are applicable no matter what the crisis you're going through. Now, if you want to hear more free advice about how to keep your writing going, I encourage you to come on over into the I Should Be Writing Facebook group. Coming up in April and May, we are going to be doing lots of free workshops, and on April 27th, we will be starting the 5-day summer writing challenge. So in April, I'll be doing my workshop, my free workshop called How to Write More Without Big Blocks of Time. I'm also going to be doing a summer writing planning webinar, which is like we sit down and I walk you through how to create a calendar for your summer writing, how to set goals. It was super popular in 2019, so I'm bringing it back in 2020. And then we cap off the summer writing prep with the 5-day summer writing challenge that starts on April 27th and ends May 1st. If you want to make sure that you hear about all these fantastic opportunities for free training and coaching, please come and join the I Should Be Writing Facebook group. The link is in the show notes, or you can go to facebook.com/groups/I Should Be Writing. And also, I encourage you, if you are looking for ways to make time to write, to go on over to the link in the show notes and grab my free PDF resource, 10 Ways to Make Time to Write. When you sign up to get that resource, you will be invited to stay on my email newsletter, where you will get emails about the podcast episodes. Every time a podcast episode comes out, we send an email. When I do live videos, we send you an email. And when we have training, free training events and challenges, we also send that out to our list. So if you are interested in making sure you get all of that information, then hop on over to download the 10 Ways to Make Time to Write PDF. Thank you so much for spending your valuable time loving on yourself and your writing by listening to this episode. If you'd like to continue the conversation, join the over 7,000 academic women in the I Should Be Writing Facebook group. Just go to facebook.com/groups/I Should Be Writing or search for I Should Be Writing inside your Facebook app. See you inside.